We're going to take a few moments and talk about budget priorities and your budget process, make sure it's focused on the right things. We're going to talk about the term or timing for those priorities, the context and scope, as well as whether you want to set formal priorities or go with informal priorities. First of all, it's important to realize that the way you allocate resources through your budget really reflects what your priorities are. And it can be either intentional or by default. And what we're going to talk about is making it intentional, making sure that the budget reflects the right priorities and that everybody's in agreement or understands what those are so that the community is clear about what the focus is. This is done in a variety of ways. And oftentimes, you may already be involved in some activity that would be a way that you could leverage that activity to create the alignment in your budget with those priorities. Examples are things like strategic plans or a comprehensive plan, as long as it's really comprehensive. Oftentimes a comprehensive plan complies with the Growth Management Act, and so therefore it deals with land use and the required elements, but maybe it doesn't deal with public safety, or maybe not as much with parks operations or recreation. And if that's the case, then maybe it provides part of the answer, but not enough or all the answer, and you want to be careful to be clear about that. You may have business plans. I know some communities in Washington are very effective in building business plans and aligning the thinking both in terms of policy, operations, and in their budget through their finances with their business plans. And it's been an effective way for them to communicate about what it is they're doing and be clear about that both with their staff and with their community. Budget goals, sometimes those things don't exist, and you may find that you need to create them. And it can be as simple as sitting down before you start your budget process and developing goals that help guide that process to the right results. And keep in mind that one of these need to exist if that budget is going to reflect who you are and what you intend to accomplish. Broad goals are long-term. They're not limited by time. They're not intended to be objective in the sense that there's a clear beginning or end. It's more important that the broad goals kind of reflect who you are, what's important to you as an organization. Examples of efficient transportation systems, or your citizens are able to feel safe in their neighborhoods. Things of those sorts are good examples of broad goals. You would want to update the goals from time to time, so they're not time limited, but that doesn't mean you can't go back and fine-tune them. In fact, that's probably a great thing to do at the beginning of each budget cycle, is have a check-in and make sure everybody continues to be on board with what you've characterized as your focus as an organization. And that helps make sure that there's consistency up and down, both with policymakers and the staff, and that the community's in alignment as well. And again, that you start this all from the same page and same perspective. That's important before you get too much involved in beginning to do some of the mechanical work of building a budget. The budget goals are oftentimes an add-on and something for you to think about. If you've got good broad goals or a sense of mission or vision or things of that sort, that's a great start, but it's probably not specific enough to provide good direction to those who are putting together information for you as you build your budget. So you maybe want to augment that with specific budget goals, something for you to think about. The context that you're developing these in is something for you to check in on and be aware of. Do an environmental scan, and by this I mean look around. What's going on? Is the economy strong, or is it weak? Is it in transition? Are there pockets that are one or different than another? Have you got different kinds of changes in your demographics that need to be taken into account? Those are the kinds of things that are meant when we talk about an environmental scan. Sometimes it can be things that are informed by maybe neighboring jurisdictions that you want to take into account as well. So do a check-in, look around, see take the temperature, if you will, of your community, and make sure that that informs your thinking in terms of what you think your goals should be for this next upcoming budget. And oftentimes this can specifically have to do with the economy. A lot of us characterize budgets as either status quo budgets or growth budgets or cutback budgets, clearly reflecting the economy and the way that that provides resources for us to be able to pursue those goals. Oftentimes you hear the phrase, we're pursuing these goals. The rate at which we pursue them can be informed or is informed by the economy and how much resources are provided for that. Be sure you understand that a little bit and communicate that effectively. As I've seen oftentimes a mismatch between expectations based on differences in opinion about what the economy is enabling you to do and how much you're able to make progress on those goals based on the economic factors. The general fund tends to be where we spend a lot of our energy thinking about the budget, and that's important. Clearly, those tax resources that primarily make up the general fund's resources and the kinds of things that it provides through public safety and parks and things of that nature are important. However, we oftentimes are also involved in many other kinds of businesses as well. Utility accounts, special revenue types of things, the hotel, motel, tourism account, for example, with respect to special revenues. Internal processes, be the fleet, technology, things of that nature. So the scope of our goal setting and our thinking about direction needs to be inclusive of these other areas as well. And I would just here add the caution, focus on the general fund, understand that, and that's typical, but don't overlook those other also important aspects of your organization as well. Now, I advocate strongly for a formal goal setting opportunity for policymakers and organizational leaders to together be involved with and set the direction of the organization, either in the context of budget or in some other context, but then used and leveraged by the budget process. And this is, again, what I would characterize as a retreat. Call it what you will. I don't think that's important. What's important is that you get out of the normal day-to-day setting, that you think about this differently. It's not just another agenda item on your council business meeting where you have a 15-minute discussion about what's important and then move on. It requires focus, some prep, and a different kind of setting and a different kind of atmosphere where this big picture thinking can occur and not be encumbered by the other distractions that tend to occur in a typical council meeting or in a typical council setting. I also recommend a facilitator, and while it's not mandatory, what you miss if you don't have a facilitator is an objective person in the room who can make sure that the various voices are getting heard, that can manage the meeting, that can help make sure that at the end of the meeting you've accomplished what you set out to do, that keeps pushing the participants to accomplish the goal setting or the purposes of the meeting, whatever they happen to be. And if somebody inside does this, they oftentimes are encumbered by, one, their perspective. And while they will work to potentially to be objective, they really can't disassociate themselves from who they are at the end of the day. Secondly, they're really encumbered by their ability to manage the conversation. They already are, if you will, a known commodity, and people will put them in that box as they work to lead the meeting. So it doesn't have to be a fancy or expensive facilitator or an expensive venue, but something, a facilitator that can be objective, has some experience in a venue that can change the mindset and enable you to think bigger than you typically do in your typical council meetings. So when you're working to put the goals together, it can sometimes be tempting to create an impressive looking list and to feel, that that's good enough and that you've done your job. But you actually need to provide specific priorities to those that you're asking to build these budgets and to allocate these resources. Take the time and do the work that's required to put these things in priority order, to get the list down to where it's feasible and makes some sense instead of everything is a priority and everything is equal. That's really not true. You know that's not true. And at the end of the day, that's really not going to be as effective as if you continue to do the hard work and create a focus list of a few priorities and indicate to, at least in some fashion, what are the top tier priorities, that's middle tier, bottom tier. Maybe that might be an approach that you would find helpful. Short of a formal approach, let me assure you that an informal approach does work. And I've worked in cities where the leadership decided they didn't want to create formal policies and formal goals. And so those of us that were working to help lead the organization essentially created our own in this vacuum. And those informal policies really kind of took the form at least for our intents and purposes, of the formal policies. Now, I will assure you that they were not in alignment across the organization, and each of us were doing the best we could to lead within our own sphere of influence, but informal certainly was not as effective as a formal policy-making exercise would have been on behalf of that community.